This is Beyond Busy. I'm Graham Allcott. I'm the author of a number of books, including the global bestseller How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I'm the founder of Think Productive. We work with some of the world's leading companies to help them get stuff done, but more importantly, to help their people to make space for what matters. Beyond Busy is where I explore the often messy truths and contradictory relationships around topics like work-life balance, happiness and success, and explore with interesting people what makes them tick. In short, this is where we ask the bigger questions about work. My guest today is Alex Barker. Alex is the chief pirate at Be More Pirate. She's also the co-author of How to Be More Pirate with Sam Conniff, who we've previously had on this show. And having spent years working in some quite traditional establishment workplaces, she's on a mission to fill them with a sense of rule-breaking rebellion. In this episode, we talk about what it means to be a pirate, challenging the status quo. She shares her reflections on burnout, and we give you loads of ways to apply the pirate code creatively to make work and life better. This is Alex Barker. Alex Barker, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you for having me on.
Where are you in the world right now?
I am in my flat in London, which is in Hither Green, which no one's ever heard of, but it's sort of between Blackheath and Lewisham and Catford, I'd say.
Yes, I had a friend who lived in Hither Green actually, so I have been to Hither Green before.
Yeah, it's surprisingly small with a massive train station. There's 6 platforms serving a really small few streets. So.
And there's probably some like historical reason for that to do with Victorian train line planning or something.
Yeah, and I even think
London's quirky like that, right?
Definitely, and I even think they've probably explained it in photographs on the wall of the train station, but I've never really read them.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I'm in Brighton. The sun is shining. It's a lovely day out here, so that's nice. And we're here. We're going to talk about your book, which is called How to Be More Pirate, and it links back to Sam's book Be More Pirate, which was the sort of start of this journey. And we've had Sam on Beyond Busy before, so if you're an avid Beyond Busy listener, you've probably heard the episode I did with Sam Conniff Allende previously. So you became Sam's right-hand pirate, and now you are the chief pirate.
Yes.
Right. So from ninja to pirate, I have to kind of start at the beginning of that then. So tell me the story about how did you come across Sam? How did you come across the whole idea of Be More Pirate, and how did you get involved?
So I did remember Sam because I was working at the RSA, which is the Royal Society of Arts. It's a social innovation charity, think tank, and sort of membership organisation for people who want to do positive change. And I remember Sam coming to do a talk about Be More Pirate, but I didn't really pay any attention to it because we had about 3 or 4 speakers a week. At that point, I was personally a little bit burnt out by taking on 2 extra jobs, and I kind of just honestly was getting a bit disillusioned with the whole social change world agenda anyway. I thought, here's another guy coming in with his big idea in his book, and sure, it's a great marketing concept, but what does that mean for doing anything and in the world? And so I was kind of didn't really pay any attention to Be More Pirate. And then I was taking on these extra jobs because I was really working towards a sabbatical. The RSA lets you take a sabbatical after, I think, 5 or so years. So I was really just gearing up to this massive break when I could go off and kind of figure out, why I'd gotten so burnt out, and whether I was heading in the right direction at all. So that was, so I did, on the sabbatical, I went to Vietnam and thought I'll just be somewhere warm and, chill out for a bit. And I had
nice. How long is the sabbatical that they let you take?
I took the full whack of 6 months, although I ended up playing it short and doing 4 months. Because
do they pay you for all of that?
No,
or they just
they
pay you
don't
for
pay
some
you.
of
It's
it?
unpaid, so you have to obviously
Unpaid.
That's why I was working 2 extra jobs.
Okay, so you're working the extra jobs to burn yourself out in order to take the time. Yeah,
Honestly,
makes
well, we
sense
can
though.
talk about burnout later, but it
Yeah.
was not the physical labour. The extra job I was doing was actually working with this woman who's now an author, who's fantastic. Is like the most uplifting person you could work for. We're doing this project on domestic violence research, and it was fascinating. Actually, that was really interesting. It was more. I think it was the grind, probably more at the RSA that was, and a few other things personally that were going on. So yeah, so I'd left. I'd taken, and I took my Kindle with lots of potential books to read, and I'd basically done this thing of just downloading the first chapter of all the books that looked a bit inspiring or interesting and could help me redirect myself. And one of them was Be More Pirate, but I started reading it and I put it down because I just thought, God, yes, it's going to be about social change, and I just didn't have any faith in any of that anymore. And so I was like looking for something, I don't know, else. I think I just started reading fiction. I was like, just want to bury myself in another world. And then it was kind of a series of like coincidences, I suppose, in a way that got me to Be More Pirate in the end. I spent a bit of time really thinking about what I wanted to do and why I had ended up where I'd ended up, and what was I really looking for out of my life. And I basically just I just wrote down some words. One of them was adventure, and then I broke it down a bit more and said, like, I want a lack of routine. I want something more exciting. I want to be able to connect with lots of different people, and I don't know, a bit of serendipity, I think, and just be learning all the time. So those were a few things. I just wrote that down and was like, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what job role it is or sector, but that's where I'm going.
So you just wrote it down as like themes, basically.
Yeah.
Like these are the flavors of what I want, and I don't know what sector that is or what job role it is, but just like I want this.
Yeah, I kind of instinctively thought about what are the conditions I want in my life, rather than, because I kind of just knew that aiming for like a specific job, probably won't make me happy. I have to figure out what it is that I actually, the conditions in my life that I want first. So, and then I think that was near the beginning, and then a couple of weeks later, I came across Alistair Humphreys, who's this adventure writer who I think you.
Yes, who's also been on the podcast before as well.
I suggested you did because
cool. Yeah,
go for it.
So Right Hand Pirate, and what were your expectations around what would the working conditions of a right hand pirate look like?
I thought it was pretty clear in the description that there would be a lot of flexibility and autonomy, and that was what I was looking for. That's what I needed, but with the ability to direct how this went, because it was essentially to build a community out of Be More Pirate. And I knew a bit about building communities through the RSA, so, but I thought, well, I can take what I know doesn't work there and apply it and do it differently. But then when I kind of got into the deeper job descriptions that had been put together, because after you kind of got through the first round of it, there was a sort of more in-depth description of what kind of things might be part of the job. And that's when I could start to take to task some of it, like, why do we want to do it? It was like an event every month. And I said, well, that's a lot of work. I know that's a lot of work. That could take up, half your month, organizing, planning, especially if we're under-resourced or it's just me. So I was like, I'm not going to go and just do that just because that's what's written down. I need to think about what is the end goal here. Like, what are we gathering these people for? What's the impact? It's not about scale. And Sam had said, like, he's against scale in the book. So that can't be the measure of success, or maybe it is, but over time. But I need to understand these people who've responded to your book first. I need to know our community before I can do anything with it. That was my approach. So yeah, I could.
And also part of working around like the whole Be More Pirate thing is having the confidence to question everything, right, and do things differently and all that stuff. So if you got in there and just said, yep, here's the exact list of stuff you want, I will deliver exactly that, it's kind of not really in keeping with how all this stuff works, right?
No, but it's amazing how much the pullback is. Some people have described it to me as like an elastic band of like conventionality that pulls you back in. You try and stretch it, but then it sort of snaps you back. We are just somewhat conditioned to do things in a particular way, and as soon as you start to break out of that, it does feel it feels uncomfortable and it feels wrong.
Yeah.
it's quite hard to resist that, especially in an interview where you are facing someone you think must know better than you. But then I asked Sam very directly, I said, who is your community? Like, who is this? I'm going to be a community manager. Who is it to? And he goes, I have no idea.
I don't know.
And that was great. And there was like a lot of humor and authenticity and sincerity there. That was just, I could see that this would work.
Nice.
Yeah.
So before we delve into the role and what you're doing, we should probably just backtrack slightly and talk a bit more about piracy, pirates, be more pirate as a theme. So do you want to just give us the kind of main story of why being a pirate is a useful thing in work and business and life?
Yes. Okay. So the gist of Be More Pirate, in one sentence, is the way things are is not the way things have to be. And it reframes the golden age of piracy, a period of history that's a really short period of history from about 1690 to 1725, when this small group of kind of ordinary citizens, mainly sailors in the Navy and on merchant ships, kind of decided that they were going to rebel and they were going to go off, form crews of their own and kind of live and work in their own way. And obviously the establishment criminalized them, called them pirates, and they've since created and developed this reputation of kind of being bloodthirsty villains that has been rubber stamped by Walt Disney. But actually pirates, the story is a bit different, and that's what Be More Pirate talks about, or Sam talks about. These people actually were really kind of seeking freedom and a better life. On a Navy ship, you would probably you were unlikely to, you had a 60% chance of survival. And then you also,
Wow.
it was like only 40% of sailors died on any voyage. And
Wow.
so they over recruited, which obviously made the conditions worse. So you're on a ship that's overcrowded, where you're more likely to get disease, and that sort of contributed to the high death rate. And then at the end of it, if they hadn't succeeded in their whatever plundering the ship was doing, you wouldn't necessarily even get paid as a crew member. There was absolutely zero like good working conditions, and that was just the way things were. You were not a person of importance or relevance, and so you could be treated in whatever way the people with the wealth decided. And ships were owned by merchants back on shore, so they weren't even involved. You didn't have really any investment in how the voyage went, other than it sort of survived. So it was pretty dire. And so you can see like why being a pirate might actually be a bit more appealing.
Right.
It's not because they just, I get this all the time. People say, weren't they just thieves? Didn't they just rob everyone? And yes, they did rob people. But if you consider at the time where it was a time of empire, when really we were kind of going around robbing lots of places as a nation, and especially the Spanish. And I think, it's a slightly different moral framework. So pirates so what pirates were doing when they had formed their ships or their crews was creating a different way of living and working together that was in direct opposition to the Navy and what they'd experienced. So like, we can't do it that way because we know how easily power corrupts, and so they just created means to ensure that conflict didn't break out on board. Things like equal pay, equal say, social insurance, so if people got injured, they would actually get compensation, so they weren't just being kind of like thrown into battle. They even had same-sex marriage. They had, very alongside relative equality, they actually invited people on from wherever. It was very diverse. They had black pirate captains, they had female pirates. So it was this entirely, what seems, when we look back now, really, really progressive agenda. And I don't think it was because they were trying to be progressive. It was just that they were just doing things that made sense in order to stop mutiny. And it's a really interesting parallel and reflection to today, where a lot of people inherently know that a lot of the rules we have in our workplaces don't really make sense, but no one really says anything or does anything about it. Or wait,
And I guess things aren't, quite to the level of slum conditions where 40% of you will die. So there's a little bit more comfort is enough to push people more into conformity, right? Whereas if the tougher things get, the more likely people are to rebel and try and think of something else.
Yeah, but I think I just to sort of push back on that. I think there is a point about visibility, because we know that when you do surveys, like 85% of people are disengaged from work. So there is a sort of
Yeah.
quiet misery perhaps about it. And we've seen, see the rise in sort of mental health problems that's not really acknowledged a lot of the time. I'm not saying it's quite the same, but I think, at least in my experience, there's a lot more going on underneath the surface, and it's not quite as happy or as comfortable as maybe we'd like to think.
Yeah, that's true. And I saw you did a talk recently, and one of the things you were saying in that was how, like, no one's coming to save us, right? So I think you were sort of reflecting on what had happened with Brexit, and politicians were seemingly, acting as if they knew all the answers, but quite clearly didn't know all the answers. And I think you talked about when will all the grown-ups turn up, and who's going to come and save us. And there's something in the philosophy of pirates which is very much around action, right? It's like, let's not just sit and feel, quietly dejected by this sort of, quiet discomfort, but let's actually just grab the bull by the horns, do something, make some change, take action. So, like, action's a big part of this whole philosophy, right?
Yeah, absolutely is. The "no one's coming to save you" is directly from Be More Pirates, sort of Nick Sam's line. But that's the line that has definitely resonated with the most people, and it was definitely how I felt at the time of joining this, of realizing, hang on. But yeah, no, it is about action, and it was because I think, my revolt from the Navy, if I call the RSA the Navy, I don't care, the establishment, let's say, was that, there was a lot of talk about change, but what does it mean to really put your money where your mouth is? What will you sacrifice to actually make these ideals happen? I think that's really important. Whether it's sacrificing a bit of extra time, a bit of extra cash, like putting a bit on the line. Maybe it doesn't feel like this is exactly within budget, but maybe it's worth it. But I didn't see any of that real kind of urgency or courage emerging. Or when it does, it was stamped out quite quickly, oddly, I think. That sort of energy that pirates have, I feel like that's what we need. And that's definitely what I found in Be More Pirate, and what obviously thousands of other people have as well, which is great.
Yeah. And a lot of that's an entrepreneurial kind of energy, right? Where you just want to create something, and you believe in it so much that you make it happen, even if you don't know where the money's going to come from, or how you're going to eat in 3 weeks' time or something. And you don't necessarily have that stability of paycheck, but you just inherently know that this is the thing that you want to do. Like, why do you think that kind of entrepreneurial, risk-taking, pirate kind of energy is always stamped out? Because surely there's, within teams, always a need to push stuff forward and have people that are willing to take risks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think in terms of, I think I was part of that stamping out. And I think there's something about the fact that we are taught that critical thinking is a valuable skill. So, questioning people and doubting their ideas is useful to an extent, because you're sort of challenging it. But actually, the way that it's done quite often sort of puts a roadblock in their own self-belief. I noticed that a lot from working with social entrepreneurs who are maybe not well established yet, and I didn't appreciate. I really, really didn't appreciate how much hard work it is to be an entrepreneur of any kind, social or otherwise. That you're trying to create this whole thing on your own, probably get funding. You're doing every aspect of the business. And whereas in an organization, that work is so much more evenly spread. So I think there's definitely a recourse to, like, question whether this idea is really viable. But then I think that there's a lot of ego that comes into the ideas space, let's say, of like, this is my idea, or that's been done before, or like, you're not kind of, I think that's definitely. And then I guess if you're talking about being entrepreneurial in an organizational setting, like, you're the person who's saying, let's do the new idea. Yeah, I think a lot of it does, because I can say this from my own perspective. I remember a guy coming into the RSA when I was comms manager, who was phenomenally bright and could come up with some new kind of workarounds for our system that wasn't quite there. And I definitely felt threatened by it. I was like, you're doing my job for me. You're doing it better than me. And because you've got this new fresh perspective of going, well, why do you do it that way? That doesn't work. And he just come in and I was like, wow. But, you know, luckily, like, I guess I was like, we've, you know, the goal is to improve it. So let's go with it. And I could recognize my ego and go, okay, just get over it. But I can see that would be something that definitely, that does cause that's a reason why people could sort of get shut down very, very quickly. And sometimes
it's like change and ruckus are just inherently uncomfortable, right? So if you're part of a team or an organization where a lot of stuff is changing, then that will be uncomfortable because the goalposts are moving, your roles are moving, different people are coming in. Like, it's kind of upsetting the structures and normalities, right?
Yes, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think that when change is good, people are like, yes, or if they're able to be fully involved in it and
that's
contribute.
true.
But it's when the change comes in and it's like a threat to what you've already been doing. So I see that a lot in working with companies where the change is such a threat to your kind of organizational identity, and it kind of means that your role's either a bit redundant or it's a sort of insinuation that what you were doing was not really the right thing. That's just really hard to deal with, and if it's not dealt with openly. So I think the point is you have to find ways in which you deal with that challenge. So as a challenger, you have to come in and understand how to manage it and use a bit of diplomacy. So it's odd coming from a pirate, because I think that the impression is that we're guns blazing all the time, but actually this is something I've learned through our community, that practicing challenge in the right way is really important. So you're prepared, you're confident, you're not backing down, but you're understanding where the resistance is likely to be and take on board other people's views.
Yeah.
Tell
me about the community then. You just mentioned the community there. So when you first came on board, you said to Sam, who's the community? He said, I don't know. But then obviously that was a while ago and you've built up a bit of a community now. So who's involved in that community, and what are they doing and discussing, and what plans are being hatched together?
So at the beginning it was, I didn't know who everyone was, and I think so what I started to do is just to pick up the emails that Sam had received from people and respond and just dig around, build relationships in whatever way I could. Some people were abroad, some people were UK, wherever possible. I met people face to face. I think it's just better. And it's, I guess I describe it less as a network of like Be More Pirate and then there's loads of individuals, but it's almost like there's lots of individuals who have crews of their own. So it's sort of like fleet
right.
people. And we've got, quite distinct crews in different places. So like I've got a whole chapter in the book about like the health and social care pirates, because that was definitely the sector that responded most to the book. And that's a point about piracy, like where you have an environment that's very rule driven and very hierarchical. Need more pirates, because, or at least maybe they haven't moved to that yet, but the feeling of like this is what we need is stronger than when you're in perhaps a more creative environment to begin with. And so I had the health and social care crew. There's a whole sort of what they call the artistic mutiny, which is all about challenging funding in the arts and getting fairer pay for freelancers and things. And that grew really quickly. It's led by a woman called Sarah Sheed, and kind of went from like 100, like 5 meeting, and like she had 5 people around for dinner, and then next day she put up a Facebook group to say, is anyone interested in getting involved? Then it was like 100 people, then it was like 1,000. She's like,
wow.
She's like, what do I do with all these people? Wow. Now she's the captain of that crew. Like so that's sort of, I guess, how it works. There's various others and they have their own thing. And this is a really important part. This is also a really important part about the network building, is that it's not Be More Pirate trying to subsume everyone with our brand of the book. It's like you take piracy and you understand what battle you're fighting, and you make it your own and fly your own flag like high, and we'll fly it as high as we can as well. I don't want to that kind of brand control or trying to be a nucleus, like only insofar as it supports what they're doing. yeah, there's like various things. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges going on in the healthcare guys. Like they've just this morning were talking about how one of their missions is to try to get more spaces in hospitals made into sort of like public living room style places so that people can meet and connect, because it's so lonely and alienating when you're ill, and hospitals are just still very clinical. There's just no one there really doing that. But it's a very small intervention that could really make the difference to people who are there a lot, or carers who coming in and out all day. So that was just one example of the kind of rules they're trying to break and rewrite.
Nice.
Yeah.
And there's a few examples of this in your book as well, right? Where people have taken the inspiration from Be More Pirate and then applied it. So are there any others that you could mention here that might inspire people listening to this to break some rules?
Sure. There's like the whole book is examples. So I'm trying to think like what's the most useful thing. I mean, there's small rule breaks that start because, what I call small bold actions, that start because you just see something that just doesn't make sense to you, and you kind of gotta it's just a sort of wrong that you can right quite quickly. Something like there's one of the examples in the book is I've given it lots of times in various talks, but is a woman who was working in HR and says, I hate the fact that we use competitive instead of actual salary ranges, or even a distinct salary. It just doesn't seem fair that people wouldn't know what they're going to get paid. And so I said, you can change that. Like, why not change it? And then there were bigger ideas, or like these ideas. And then there's one crew in the Manchester group who just created a set of new rules that they put on the end of their email signature, which is about breaking the tyranny of emails and just like changing the email culture, because they felt it was so stifling. And it's like a really small step, but like a significant one in trying to change the culture. And then there's like other organizations, one that's right at the beginning, the Child's Rights International Network, which is a human rights NGO, and their challenge is big. Like, they're trying to challenge the entire sort of NGO charity sector about the way that it operates and is run. But they started by sort of creating their pirate code to set out their principles and their values, to talk about what they're really standing against. And it's things like they're standing against like types of jargon and like vague and obstructive language that often gets bound up in when you're talking about human rights, that stops people from really understanding the issues properly. And launched kind of bigger campaigns that tackle like some quite fringe issues around children's rights, but they all kind of stem from their code and understanding their values. So they range from like small rule breaks to like big kind of missions. Yeah.
Nice.
There's like lots of different
I want to hear more about the email one, obviously, with this being a productivity podcast. So tell me about how to break the email rules.
So I think they put be more pirate, break the tyranny of emails by thinking before I email. Can I have a conversation instead? Taking protected time away from email and spending it on focusing on the stuff that will make the biggest difference. Checking my tone. Am I structuring my email in a way I'd be pleased to receive? And if it's bad news, I won't deliver it by email. Just like 4 rules that they created around to make their email culture better. Quite simple. And I think on the productivity side, one that's kind of I've often used in talks and things is the team at Birdseye, who all of their rules were pretty much around productivity, because they were just overwhelmed by their emails and their diaries. So they had things like meeting-free Mondays, a 1 in 1 out rule. So if a new piece of work comes on your desk, you have to let something else go. They gave everyone, be here now, which is a no mobiles in meetings rule. Fuck it time, which is to give everyone 2 hours a week pure to just work on something creative. What else? Kind of the 80-20 rules. So I can't remember that. Is that right? I might have got that wrong.
Yeah, that's a productivity thing.
That's the gist of like, and the main like crux of their kind of mutiny though was that what they needed was collective permission, because it was too kind of scary for one person to just go, right, I'm not doing this anymore. They needed to have that open conversation about, okay, this is not allowing us to put, this stuff is creating no space for us to achieve our bigger ambitions. So, but I don't want to stop doing it because I'm afraid of looking incompetent or lazy or whatever. So they just needed to recognize collectively this stuff gets in our way. So we need to.
Yeah, we have a thing with Think Productive with our annual strategy day, where one of the items on the agenda is always smash shit up, which comes from Brewdog.
Yeah.
And the item is basically questioning things that we're doing that we don't think are necessary, killing any sacred cows, and just being curious. So the idea of it is that everybody fills in stuff on Post-it notes, and then we put them on a flip chart. And I read them out because I can't recognize anyone's handwriting. So it's basically an anonymous way of getting these things across. And it's amazing how often you say, this 2-hour meeting that we're doing every month, is it actually useful? And everyone goes, oh, thank God, someone else. Like, everyone sort of suffers quietly with a lot of this stuff, don't they? Whereas actually, if you have the permission, but you have to create the permission and the environment to actually discuss it. Otherwise, like you say, people just feel like they're stepping out of line, or they feel like, they're the only one that thinks this. They don't want to look stupid. There's a whole bunch of things that stop that kind of attitude of curiosity of developing, I think.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of the meetings, I wouldn't say even get rid of meetings altogether, but we need to repurpose meetings. So I've seen teams think about using them to actually create more connection, or to use them particularly for companies that have a more purpose-driven mission or more ethical in some way, to really touch base on their mission and what they're reading about the wider landscape of it, particularly when it's environmental stuff, because it's become, it's quite urgent, and there's a lot of anxiety around that, and whether we're doing enough and what is enough. And I think, that communication, using meetings for real proper communication, like deep, like dialogue, rather than task orientated. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So before you took on this whole new mission around piracy, the organizations that you worked for before, so the RSA, and before that you were studying at King's College, studying international development and specializing in looking at the Middle East and peace in the Middle East, like a lot of stuff that feels quite, and a lot of stuff around supporting charities and social entrepreneurs, like a lot of that feels almost quite establishmenty, right? And a lot of you working with and interfacing with a lot of big institutions. So is that something that you feel like you've rejected, or tell me more about that place that you got to in terms of feeling burnt out and like you weren't really in the right place?
So I just, I did like what anyone did. I just went to university because my parents told me to. And actually, weirdly, I wanted to originally study Egyptology, but my dad was like, you will never get a job.
Right.
Ever, and I'm not paying for that. So, all right, fine. Take your point. So I actually did literature first. And that was brilliant. And that was an odd degree. It was like comparative literature, which is like, it's an American degree. So you end up studying really random things, like you can just pick anything kind of like from all over the world. So you don't do the kind of Dickens, Shakespeare stuff. So I don't know. I definitely had a taste for like more fringe things, but I did international relations after, because it was 2008 and it was a recession, and I had no idea what to do. My literature degree just seemed like useless. That sounds really derogatory, but it was sort of the narrative that I was being told, and I didn't have any particular specialist skills to offer. So I just thought I'll continue studying as the opportunity was there, and very gratefully received by my parents. And I thought politics, because I'd done politics A-level. I kind of interested in politics, and it sounded serious. I was like, people will take it seriously if I do this. That was pretty much my thinking. It was like as basic as that. And then it was also my best mate. One of my best mates on my course was like, I'm doing international conflict studies, you should do the same. That was pretty much our conversation. And I said, okay. So I was like, no, so far from piracy at that point. And I ticked the Middle East modules sort of by accident. I didn't really know what they meant. I didn't know what the occupied territories since 1967 meant, but I just thought, okay. Because it was, they did said that you wouldn't necessarily get those modules. So I thought, well, try. Anyway, I ended up on these Middle East courses and kind of really delved into, the particularly the Arab-Israeli conflict. I also have family in Israel. So that was sort of like a background, I guess it was a background interest I hadn't really acknowledged, but kind of ended, and we were just after the Iraq War as well. So there was this huge upswell of interest in what was that region. And it was so fascinating. And kind of illuminating in many ways. I want to say something about it being establishment. Yeah, I guess I questioned. I did have intellectual questions about what we were being taught around the way that the world works, around systems, and the kind of very convincing neoliberal narrative around how countries are self-interested entities, and following people as self-interested entities. And I kind of thought that doesn't really ring true to me, to be honest. But I didn't. It was just what you were taught, and I didn't really think that I knew anything. So I didn't really think that, other than evidencing thoughts through already established texts, there wasn't that much room for really original thought in that respect.
Have you come across Rutger Bregman's new book, Humankind?
It's on the many long.
Yeah. So his I'm like halfway through it. The central thesis of it is that we're always taught that everybody is selfish.
Yeah.
And the narrative that he breaks down a lot in the book is Lord of the Flies, right? So if you leave people to their own devices, then eventually they'll all screw each other over and do terrible things. And he breaks this down by saying there was actually, because the Lord of the Flies is just fiction. And it's become this thing that apparently deeply analyzes the human condition. But there was a time in the 1970s where Lord of the Flies happened for real in a little island somewhere off Australia, I think, like somewhere in the South Pacific. And basically these kids, which is quite an ironic thing to talk about with you, is that they set off sailing on a little kind of rebellion, piracy mission of their own. And then they fell into trouble. I think the boat got some problems and they ended up shipwrecked on an island. And this, this really happened in the 1960s or 1970s. Yeah. And they were eventually saved and rescued like 5 years later. But they had been self-sufficient. They had all these cooperative structures. They had figured out, as a bunch of 17-year-olds, how to cooperate and how to look after each other. One of them broke their leg and they managed to, he healed, like really perfectly healed and stuff like this. And so the book is basically saying we are all taught, and we're sort of taught to assume everyone's selfish. These systems are all really ingrained. And his thing is actually the opposite is true. And, people are actually pretty selfless and pretty generous. And I think he says on about page 3, it's like, most people are pretty decent, if they're given the chance to be. Most people are good.
Yeah, I would wholly kind of agree with that. Just instinctively, I don't have any evidence, but I'm definitely going to read that. No, I that was it. It just wasn't. It didn't make sense. And now I have other questions around, like, well, why would we? And I suspect a lot of those texts are still taught. Like, why are we still listening to just like a small group of men who came up with these theories in a particular moment in time, and the world moved on so much as well, that it just doesn't make sense. Especially as I was we were studying things like the Cold War and the difference between the psychology of Russia versus the US. Like there's such different things that influenced how they would behave. I was thinking, countries behave much like humans in the sense of having different psychologies and different experiences. So yeah, I would. Yeah, it was like I was in the institution, but I was probably deeply questioning it. But I think the main thing, and this is the thing that I see throughout the pirate community, is it's confidence. You don't, and internalizing the idea that no one's coming to save you, and by that we mean no one really knows. Like there's a degree to, obviously people have expertise, and that shouldn't be overlooked at all. So it's not to say ignore experts, but it's just to sort of ensure that you do question those bigger narratives. And I think I did come out of university doing that, because I went to the Middle East for 6 months and went to sort of look around. No, that sounds so like, what they call it, voluntourism, but like I just wanted to see, for myself, because there's only so much you can learn from a book in the end, and just try to, as much as language barriers were possible, speak to people, understand what their experience of the world was.
Yeah.
And I felt that would be equally as educational, and it was. And then I came back and kind of wanted to work in the charity sector or within sort of international development as a way to, I don't know, help and I can fix things in some way. I don't know. I didn't really know what that looked like. I didn't really have any specialist skills still. So I was almost in the same position, like almost like the world had become more complicated and I didn't know what to do. But you just start somewhere. So, and I worked for a campaign called Global Citizen, that was then called the Global Poverty Project, and that really opened my eyes up to almost a lot more inequality and issues. And I don't know if, I mean, it was fascinating and motivating, but it was also like I definitely had a bit of a mini meltdown at some point, just because the problems seemed so entrenched and unfixable. And
yeah, and I think I saw somewhere in your bio you saying something like it felt like the people who worked in charities were really detached from the causes they were trying to fix or the problems they're trying to fix. So tell me more about that.
Oh God. This is where I dig myself a hole, but maybe not. Yeah, so this is actually probably a bit later. Like the guys at Global System were brilliant and really passionate and brave and willing to go beyond. And then it was really, to be honest, well, I took a job in a social care charity, and that was a bit of a terrible experience. Kind of on a personal level too, which I won't go into, but I think that I was dealing with people who were like frontline care workers, working with people with mental health and learning disabilities. And I mean, point one, like the level of bureaucracy that got in everyone's way was just phenomenal. They just weren't creating things that actually work for people. And then the power and management was, I didn't feel like they really cared about the people. And and then I started working in the RSA, and that environment is slightly different in that it's the kind of thought leadership world, let's say, where really the goal, it feels, is to have to be seen to have great ideas. And you've got to wonder where that comes from. I mean, on a really basic level, I think, and it's something I always say to people in workshops about, how do you disrupt that environment? And you can disrupt it by taking your researcher staff out into the world and going to the places that they're kind of researching and writing about. But that was something that didn't really happen. It was sort of seen as a waste of resources to go and spend time with, a random group of people who you might really learn something from. And it's something that's come back to me so much through Be More Pirate, that my network is now not homogenous anymore. Like some of my good friends, my pirate friends, are in their mums with kids and live in Manchester. And otherwise I was pretty much just within a sort of very middle class professional bubble. And that was really, it was very much an echo chamber of that. And no one was doing anything to disrupt it. So I'm trying to be diplomatic. But I think that it was a bit of an ego-driven competition. And what's the point in writing another blog and another report with 10 takeaways? Do the takeaways,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Come on, let's get our boots on the ground and go and do it, or even mobilize the brilliant networks that you have to do it. What's the point otherwise? We can't go another cycle of a year and congratulate ourselves and say, oh, brilliant, we got this amount of views on our website, we've rebranded our website, we've got, this many newsletter opens, if you don't know the impact at the end. And this is, not to say that the RSA doesn't have any impact or anything like that, just sort of naming them as because of where I've come from, but it just wasn't, I didn't feel real. So that really influenced my, and I'm not saying in any respect that Be More Pirate has all the answers either, because I think that's a mistake to go, because then you just end up,
because then you're just the person with the coolest new idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And that's not it. That's not it. And that's why I like people taking the ideas and just making them their own and adapting and going, well, actually this bit doesn't work, and for us we need to do it this way. And that's why I say with the pirate code, there is no one way to do this. There's no magic formula of principles that will make you right. it's your culture. You have to decide what works here based on the dynamics.
Yeah, nice. So that feels like obviously it was a big switch for you, and feels like what lit the spark in towards the pirate world was Burnout, which you're talking about before. I'd love to know more about what you went through with Burnout, and also what you learned from it.
Yes. Yeah, it's really, I've actually been reading about this quite a lot recently, because I think I definitely put myself at risk of it last year again. So I realized it's not, so when I was at the RSA, I think it was a burnout that comes when you don't understand what your purpose is. You're like, what am I contributing to here? I do the same thing day in, day out, but I don't really see what it's achieving fully, other than, within, I did, like, in terms of what matters to me, let's say, what am I achieving in terms of what I really value? And so that burnout was just a real sort of slow, like, disengagement. I think that's a particular kind. But then I've since realized that I probably have a slightly inbuilt productivity drive that comes from my parents to an extent, but also I think our generation and I read a really good article on this that really helped me to process what burnout is, where she talks about it, particularly in relation to the sort of millennials, a period where, we came out dealing with a recession, and there being a sort of gradually less, fewer jobs, or less job security, and coupled with kind of rising costs, and that we have grown up to kind of think that we can beat that that the system's unfair, but if we optimize ourselves enough, we'll beat it. And there's got to be selfishness, so be that winner. And that's definitely what I have grown up thinking. Like, you could, like, from competitive schooling, like taking the 11 plus, like, you can win. Like, fundamentally, if you work hard enough, you can win. And then now that I essentially, through Be More Pirate, my job is to question the system itself, I now see that it's wrong to try to optimize yourself against a failing system, because that's why you end up with burnout. And that isn't your fault. The system is the fault, and the system is what needs to change. Like, it's not okay. Why should we work like over 10 to 12 hours a day, like, in order to get everything done that needs to be done, in order to make this company achieve its growth targets? Like, growth, now I dig into it more, like growth being a measure of success that is killing the planet, that was created in a wartime period to maximize productivity. Like, when we're still using it, and it's not the right thing to be using. So
Permanent growth is such a screwed up thing, isn't it? And it's just become, and you even hear, BBC, politics or economics correspondents just talking about, the growth is only at this, and it's said in such a way that it's just taken as read that that's the most important thing that we should all be thinking about.
Yeah,
but it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts.
Yep, it is nuts. And like you say, when you see those, like, figures of authority, like people with authoritative job titles, like politics or economics correspondent on the BBC, you think they can't have done all that on studying and knowledge to get it wrong, right? So probably me. But then there are these few lone voices who stand up and say, actually, we're getting it the wrong way around. And I think no one can deny that we are contributing to the destruction of the planet through this. So, and I think that human sustainability is another big issue, like knowing how you as a human are sustainable too. And it's not through spending it's not through spending all day every day at a computer screen, for sure. I had a really good chat with another pirate in Germany the other morning, and we talked about what we would do to set a new kind of culture. And if we had a new community to build, like, how would we create the culture? And I said, one of the things I said was ensuring that everybody had like 50% of their time, if they want, if it was a computer-based task, but 50% of the time had to be something that was physical as a job to do. I mean, that sounds that's a bit directive, actually. Like, you must do 50%. It would be more flexible than that. But yeah, that idea that there's different kinds of work, and the idea that we just do sort of one role is probably not particularly good for our balance. That we need mental stimulation, we need physical stimulation, and how can we look at an economics that balances those things and makes the most of it? Yeah.
And I guess linked to that is recognizing that we all do lots of stuff that really should be classed as work that is not classed as work, right? So childcare is a huge part of that. Domestic chores and gardens and all these things that we do, it's only measured in terms of the bits of that create profit for companies, whereas all of it can be valuable work, and all of it makes a little bit of the world better in some small or large way. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally
that. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'd love to talk to you a bit more about something you mentioned before, which is switching off.
Yes.
And I think you kind of categorized it as your seeming inability to sometimes switch off. So I'd love to know more about what you've done around that, and how you've recognized the problem, and things that may have kind of worked.
Yeah, there's definitely techniques that I use to make sure I do switch off, otherwise I don't sleep. But it's been a gradual process, and a process of my own piracy as well, like rebelling against, recognizing those things I just talked about why burnout happens, has empowered me to say no, and like I almost find it quite liberating to just be like, oh, I see why this has happened. But in terms of, I read fiction. I think that's one of the easiest ways I switch off. Something that's really immersive. That just helps me kind of get into an entirely different world. And I think.
And how do you make the leap from feeling buzzed full of ideas to being sat with a fiction book? Because obviously sometimes that's the moment where we give ourselves the hardest time and feel the most guilt, right? It's like, I must do these other 5 things. So you don't get to the point where you're opening the book.
So I think for me, there's a series of like there's been a lot of like cognitive kind of reasoning that has had to go on before I can just sit down with the book. Like, a big thing is the fact that now that I'm captain of Be More Pirate, let's say, that my job is much more doing this. So talking to people, facilitating, speaking, and I can't come to it if I'm drained. And so it's actually weirdly, maybe this is not a good technique, because I've sort of gone, well, this is also part of my job, so therefore I need to protect myself. But I think that should be, it shouldn't just be because I have this job role of speaking. Like, that should be something that everybody can think about, like, because it affects how you show up in your relationships and everything. And so, yeah, kind of coming, at the end, quite often in previous lives, I think people can't get home from work, slump on the sofa, kind of moan at their partner and say, oh, it's a really hard day. And then, you'd be putting that all on someone else. But if you thought about it as like, my world is that I need to, it's about how, it's not just about the fact that I was productive at work. It's about how I show up in every respect. And I need to protect that by like limiting the stuff at work that drains me. So I think this is, like I've reorientated how I think about work. I do meditation as well, so that's like an actual technique. But I tend to do that more in the morning than the evening. But I think there's also, just more. It's more sort of justifications to myself that help me. Not caring as much what people think. And that's been a process of obviously writing a book, talking about being more visible, I think, than I was before. When you work in an organization, that I kind of have to, not put too much store in people's praise or in their criticism. Otherwise, I'd find myself too crippled by trying to please everybody. So I kind of have to please myself a bit, which is.
Tell me more about that, because I'd love some tips.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't nailed it by any means, but I've noticed over the year that so one thing I did was try and find some role models who don't give a shit, who just think, God, you're great, I want to be like that. And that really helped to reorientate me. Like I listened to this podcast called The Last Bohemians. And it's like these women in their like latter year, like I'll say their, what do you call it? Their I'll say the golden.
Twilight
I don't know what you
years.
call it. Say they're probably over 50, most of them, and
Yeah.
just they're women who were like creatives or artists or groupies in the 70s who trying to just live their life like whatever, like just throw yourself into experiences, like create stuff, who cares whatever anyone thinks of it. And the woman who started the podcast, I think she's a journalist, I can't quite remember her name, but she said, like, we've got so much anxiety now in this Instagram generation about what people think. Like this generation of women need some of that energy again. Like we need to just be like, throw the wind, like who cares what people think. And I think Be More Pirate has that kind of bohemian like spirit behind it of just get on the ship and sail off. And yeah, so that I think about that often. I think about what would they do.
So yeah, just having role models who are people who can just throw caution to the wind, have a sense of abandon, and just have that attitude of like, who cares, just do it.
Yeah, I think you know them when you see them or when you hear them. You go,
Yeah.
oh, God, I wish I was a bit more like that. And that for me, that helps me to when I get up in the morning and I think like, how am I going to be? It's not so much what am I going to do, but how am I going to be?
Yeah.
And yeah, just recognizing that, like, are you actually, Graham, you said this I think you said it on LinkedIn. You said some people will find you annoying and some people will find you inspiring and whatever. And I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah. I think that was probably me retweeting someone else.
Okay.
Maybe. But yeah, I think I did share that the other week. And part of that's for me, right? So I'm putting that out there to kind of say, hey, you might find me annoying. Maybe you find something I said inspiring, and like I have to just carry on putting stuff out even if it's the former, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just, like you say, you get crippled with it and then you can't do anything.
Yeah, and someone else posted me something that was like, leadership is just showing up every day. I was like, that sounds doable.
Yeah, I can do that bit.
Keep on showing up, even if you find me too annoying. But yeah, I probably learned a lot from Sam as well, in fairness. He kind of has an innate ability to, I think, kind of, he might disagree with me, but I think he has an innate ability to sort of brush himself off. And when you look, when we've done some exercises before on like leadership timelines and looking at your peaks and your troughs, and his is like up, down, and like very, very sharp. And I think,
what do you mean leadership timeline? So as in like impact and stuff?
It was an exercise we did through a sustainability course we did, and they said like pinpoint moments of leadership in your life, and they can be moments where you've shown leadership or moments where you've seen great leadership. But then he kind of adapted it and did a bit of like a timeline of his like achievements or like not achievements, and I guess his sort of just his history that's brought him to this point, and started to use it in some of the more recent work. And it's just very, very striking that there's such deep troughs and peaks. Perhaps I don't know if everyone would have that, but it's like
so highs and lows of like success and failure, basically.
Yeah. I think it started off relating to leadership and is now just more generic sort of success and failure. But I don't know. There's a real reassurance in the fact that you can have these deep, troughs of failure and still kind of come out successful. And maybe there'll be some other dips, but so every time you get into the fear, or where's the fear coming from? It's always that trying to protect yourself from potential failure or criticism. Actually, just kind of embrace it when it comes. And just seeing, he's like, I think he said on he said to me, or he said on a podcast that, it was one point where with Liberty where he got death threats because of some of the decisions being made. And, about that now, I think, God, that would like destroy me to think that but you don't, you kind of get through it, you get on with it, you do something new, that new thing is really interesting, people love it. And then maybe like something else happens. And I don't know, the feeling for me of the arc of life reassures me a bit in not holding back.
I'd quite like to have been, I don't think I've ever had a death threat. I think I'd remember if I had. My memory is terrible, but I think I'd remember. But I would like to I would like to be someone who has come through the other side of that, because I think if you've dealt with the emotion of receiving a death threat, then somebody on Twitter thinking that you're wrong on a Tuesday afternoon, like, it's just going to be so water off a duck's back, isn't it? Like, you're not going to think about that in any kind of consequential way.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any sort of like things that help you in that respect? I mean, I don't know. I think of Twitter as being.
Sorry, you just froze there. Say that
I
again.
just said, do you have anything that helps you in that respect? Because I don't know. Like, I think Twitter's such a bit of a sort of stampede that I don't know. You don't take too much stock of it unless it's someone you really respect.
Yeah. So I've been listening to a lot of Aisha Akambi's stuff recently, who's this really incredible young thought leader around social media and the whole culture war thing and all that stuff. And one of her things is like, don't give any credibility, don't be offended by the opinions of someone who you don't give credibility to.
Yeah.
So it's like, why do you care what they think, basically? Yeah. And it's such a simple thing, but I definitely think about that a lot. And I suppose the other really honest answer to that is I try and bury my head in the sand away from that criticism, right? Like, it's just kind of easier to survive it if you don't hear it. So, like, if ever I share the link to my book on Amazon, I only look at my eyes are only allowed to be at the top of the page, because I don't want to read the reviews or even see how many of the 5 stars are colored in today. I don't want to see it. And I'm the same with, like, you know, LinkedIn and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. It's like, you know, I mean, not that I'm really on Twitter very much or that there's many comments, but like, I try and just not see. If I can't see any of that stuff, then it can't hurt me either. Whereas I think it'd probably be better to just be so thick-skinned that it's all fine.
Yeah.
But I think in reality, that describes very few people in the world. Like, I think a lot of people get more affected by that stuff than they let on.
Yeah.
You know, or that it's cool to let on. It's like, yeah, like, it cuts me up, man. If someone's like, oh, this thing you did was really shit, like, that's really, or like, even worse, where someone goes, yeah, this book was okay. Like, that's almost like even worse than them really hating it. Because if someone really hates it, you can kind of rationalize it as they are projecting their own lives onto their comments. And that's always the way people talk about it, is like, you're hearing more about them than you are about your work. But when someone just goes, yeah, it was kind of meh, like, that's like the worst.
Yeah, well, no, it's a strong reaction either way. I think
absolutely.
People who I kind of take more from people who are doing the work as well. I think they're a lot more conscious of what it takes. It's not easy to create something, put it out. So if you're not really putting yourself out there, or your opinions, your ideas, then, I mean, you can criticize it, but I think I definitely pay less attention because, I think that it's, you know, I think this, I don't know if this can sound right, but there has got to be an appreciation of, how much it takes to really put something together as a product, like a book, for example.
For sure. Yeah.
Rather than, just sort of imagining these things like easy to do. Because there's so.
I think, like, it just in general, like, criticism is easy, isn't it? And creation of anything is really hard. And I think it's just as simple as that, isn't it? Like, criticism is just so easy, and it's become like even easier these days, just with how easy it is to leave comments on social media and all that sort of thing.
Definitely.
Whereas actually not just having a good idea, but having it and then pulling the resources and people and time and everything else together to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that helps me is to just think of the fact that I can improve. Like that if you're perfect to begin with, like, where is there to go anyway? That I like the idea that in 5 years' time I might be somewhere really, like, great and interesting and do and produce something new. And this is just maybe a baseline for now. So that helps definitely.
We should both hope that in 5 years' time we listen back to this and we're both embarrassed by it. That would be the best thing.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's how it goes. So tell us about where people can get the book and find out more about you, and just anything else you want to share at the end of the episode.
Yeah, you can buy Be More Pirate or How to Be More Pirate, the new book, on our website, which is bemorepirate.com. It's like all very easy. You can email me, alex@bemorepirate.com, if you have particular ideas about piracy or doing something pirate. I always like to hear people directly. Or sign up to our very infrequent newsletter on our website, which you may or may not get something soon. And yes, if you buy the book off our website, you'll get it nicely wrapped with a skull and crossbones wax seal stamped.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. And you won't have given money to Amazon, which is always another good move too. And I have to also say that people should go to your website just for the thing that pops up at the bottom that you think is a thing that tells you about cookies, and then is not a thing that tells you about cookies. So people should go to your website just to check that out.
Do. I mean, like I said, we ain't stealing your data because very rarely send any communication. I don't know what I'd do with it. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, Alex, thanks so much for being on Beyond Busy, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure, Graham. Thanks so much.
So there you go, Alex Barker. And if you haven't checked out the previous conversation that I had with Sam Conniff, who is Alex's pirate partner in crime, we'll put the link to that in the show notes at getbeyondbusy.com. So there you'll find links to everything that we talked about during the episode, and lots more. Just to say that this, two things to say. One is that the outro to this episode is where I'm going to share my stuff now. As I talked about a couple of weeks ago, we've moved the podcast to be video and audio. So a couple of these ones we'd kind of recorded the audio before we made this change. So that's why they're just on YouTube with just sound. But like very, very quickly, what you're going to start to see is that all of the episodes have a video component. It just really gives us a lot more flexibility to share little tidbits and bits that we cut out of episodes and stuff on YouTube and on Reels and all that stuff, and Instagram and all those places. So my team behind the scenes doing the social media for us are really keen to get more of that video content. I think the word content is so terrible, isn't it? It's like everything I do is just content to fill containers. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, yeah, so the end of the podcast is where we're going to end up doing the little kind of, Graham's parish notices of what I'm doing and what's going on and all that stuff. So if you've stayed to the end, thank you. And we will continue to have normal service resumed on the endings. So hence, a bit of rambling from me, signposts to stuff I'm doing, all that sort of thing. So not loads to talk to you about at the moment, other than to say that Think Productive are doing some free webinars over the next couple of months, and I'm going to be doing a couple of live free webinars with Hayley Watts, who is my partner in crime on the meetings book that's coming out in early May. It's called How to Fix Meetings. It's available right now to pre-order. We'll put a link to that in the show notes at getbeyondbusy.com as well. But we're doing some free webinars. If you want to sign up early for those free webinars, just go to thinkproductive.co.uk. And then from the drop-down menu, if you just click on free webinars, and then you should see the dates listed there. So come join us, come and talk about meetings, geek out about meetings with us. That's going to be through the month of April, but available to sign up right now. And as always, I'm doing my Sunday emails, rev up for the week. So just go to grahamallcott.com. And actually, if you go to grahamallcott.com/links, there's like a load of stuff on there, which just talks about what I'm doing right now. Links to books, links to other stuff, links to this podcast, all that. So basically everything is at grahamallcott.com/links. See, we're getting more savvy around all this marketing stuff. It's, it feels a world away from my amateurish solo marketing efforts a year or so ago, and for most of the last decade, to be honest. So yeah, it feels like I'm sort of kicking into gear a little bit around the marketing, which is really cool. But yeah, just want to say thanks to Riz, and thanks to Emily and Aubrey and the team for putting this together, and to Think Productive, our sponsors for the show. So if you're interested in workshops, productivity, time management, meetings, email, all that stuff, we can fix that stuff for you. Just go to thinkproductive.com. And there was one other thing I wanted to say, which is that this month we are doing a whole month, a kind of theme really for these episodes is Spotlight on Brilliant Women. So because it's International Women's Day and Women's History Month, we thought it would be really good to just have each of the episodes this month profiling a really inspiring female leader. So that's going to be happening all through this month. I think I'm pretty good on gender diversity. And as I said around the time of Black Lives Matter, I think I was pretty good in the early phase of Beyond Busy on that. And I did let that slip. And I've been really on a mission to make sure I change that. And we've got some really good ones actually coming up, actually talking about bias and race and some of the conversations around that. On a couple of the future episodes coming up over the next few weeks, which will be in video format. Very exciting. So yeah, lots more to come on that, but I just really wanted to just be proactive around how I'm thinking about who this platform is elevating and amplifying and giving voice to. So that's really the spirit of things over the next few weeks for International Women's Day and International Women's History Month. So if you want to find out more, just go to getbeyondbusy.com. And as I said before, grahamallcott.com/links. You pretty much get everything you need from there. And we'll be back next week with another episode. So until then, take care. Hope you're well. Hope you're feeling spring-like and optimistic. All good. Take care. Bye for now.